Hello and welcome to the webinar by Go Inspire. My name is Nick Greatrex and I'm the Digital Director here. Today's webinar is called New World, Same Headache, Solving the Attribution Challenge with the Customer Journey Model. Over the last few months, we've seen a big change in the way that behaviour is happening online, with more and more people coming to visit the websites and shopping in a completely new way. The new world means that this change in behaviour is likely to stay, at least in some form. We've seen some of our clients have 100% increases in the visits they've had to their website. Only yesterday it was published that Dunelm had an 80% increase in their web traffic too. And this is happening across the board. Those companies who have websites are seeing vast number of visits happening and huge number of increases in transactions, which means that the problem with attribution and how to make sure that your digital marketing campaigns are getting the best ROI is an even bigger issue than it's ever been. From the customer's perspective, it's the same old story. They see lots of different adverts and lots of different mediums, online and offline, and all of these things go towards informing them and inspiring them to go on and make a transaction, whether that be in the store or on the website. From our perspective, that means that there's millions of website clicks that are happening and hundreds of thousands of visits from tens of thousands of users. We tend to see it in the same way that we've always seen it. So imagine this slide here that we have all of these dots, and these dots are representing visits to a website. We have today on the right hand side, and then left would be going backwards into the past. So in this snapshot, we've got a number of different visits in maroon, pink and dark blue. And then 3 transactions that are happening in the turquoise. So this normally shows itself on a web analytics tool to be 3 transactions over 23 visits, and that will come through as a conversion rate, a pretty good one in this instance, of about 13%. But traditional analytics tools only show the top level. And what I mean by that is that even though they do show the breakdowns of by content or by campaigns, we're not looking at it from a journey level or a customer level. We go back to that slide that we've just seen, and we're looking at those different visits. Some of those visits will be happening by the same device or by the same user. So if we look at them in a slightly different way and join them together, a different picture starts to emerge. Now, here we've got different transactions being linked to 3 different journeys and 3 different journeys that have no transactions associated to them. We can add a further bit of insight onto this to be able to see where the visits have come from, whether that be through something like an organic search on Google or coming through a blog, or indeed that could be something that is a passive interaction, so a piece of direct mail they received, an email that they've had in that they've not clicked through, or it could be something that we don't yet see in this scenario, such as a call center call. And by looking at things in the form of journeys, and the way that we do this is by clustering together the events that happen in between each other. So let's say something that happens within 7 or 8 days of each other is classed as the same journey. Or if we look at a standard interaction from a transaction model, it will be going 30 days or something similar back from there. You can begin to see how these visits are working within or between each other. Where in the previous example, and what we normally see through web analytics tools, would have been that 23 visits and those 3 transactions, we're now looking at 6 journeys and 3 transactions. And that looks at a conversion rate of 50%. This is now starting to take us from this isolated view of visits into something that is journeys, something that's more closely related to what the customer is doing and how they're using it. And then we can start to interpret that of how different channels and different campaigns work together rather than looking at them individually. Because from a customer's point of view, and actually from our point of view, if that customer in that top journey there has clicked on all of those or received all of those marketing materials, that's been a cost to us as a business. And all of that cost has gone into generating that transaction, whether it was necessary or not. And different customers will act in different ways. So there'll be some customer groups that we're following different journeys, different lengths of journeys over different times for different reasons. And normally we're not able to see or be able to break down those groups in a way that allows us to see what campaigns are working for what customer group. So we go back to this view of the world that we're looking at now. And rather than looking at the individual journeys, we can put them in the timelines of a customer. So here in this example, we've got 3 customers, customer A, customer B, and customer C. And customer B in this example has got 3 journeys in the timeline in the time period that we're looking at. And by looking at it in this way too, because we're looking at journeys, we're able to see a few things coming out here. We've got customer B at the beginning and the end of their timeline with 2 journeys that haven't got a transaction. That means that now we're able to look at, rather than just anything that's ended in a transaction and looking back 30 days, we can examine any journeys and those that don't end in a transaction, which are arguably the most interesting ones. Because if we can look at what those journeys are doing and we can see where the missed opportunity was, we've got the chance of in the future changing something to make sure that that does happen in the journey, whether that be an alteration to the product, if it's an out-of-stock product that stopped their journey, whether it be the price, that a competitor had a more competitive price, or whether it would be something else like a failed login attempt, or potentially a missed piece of marketing, a PPC ad that was not available for them to click on, so they clicked on a competitor, for example. But by looking at journeys and looking at customer timelines, you can also start to see what is happening in the moment. So instead of reacting to a transaction or some journeys that have just passed, if we look at customer B and C, they've both got interactions that have happened in the last few days. And if we look at things from a journey perspective, we're able to see that these 2 customers are essentially in market. They have a journey that's happened recently, an interaction with the website that hasn't ended in the transaction. So chances are that they're still looking and they'll be still interested in purchasing either what they're looking, what we're looking at yesterday or something similar. So now we're looking at things from a journey perspective. It means that we're able to look at attribution in a slightly different way. And as I said before, we're looking at the journeys here. You've got 6 or 7 in that top, you've got 7 in that top journey, and all of those would have been a cost to us as the retailer, regardless of or not if they had played an important role within that transaction. Typical attribution models will often look at trying to attribute the revenue to one of those visits. Some will do an even split or proportional split, but most will be trying to put revenue towards something as being the key driver. Now, from my perspective, what that means is, well, if we're looking at a traditional last click model, that would mean that on that top row again, that top journey, the last click before purchase is PPC. So if we're looking at last click model, that's what get attributed to revenue. And essentially what that's saying to me is everything that happened before it isn't needed because what was giving me the revenue was the PPC. And therefore I could switch off all of those clicks and I would still get that sale. And it's going to take a very brave marketing manager who's going to want to go and turn off those other marketing activities because we know that all of them are going to have an influence on making that sale. Now, the way that we tend to look at this at GI is the opposite approach. And that is to say, which one of those events or which one of those marketing activity was something that perhaps wasn't needed. So it wasn't adding to that journey and that transaction would have happened anyway. So rather than saying, I want to get rid of all of the others, is there something in there that if I'd removed, the transaction would disappear too? So I'm going to take you through the example and look at that second to last click, and the one in orange with the laptop symbol that says PPC. So imagine a scenario where we decide to switch off that PPC marketing campaign because we believe that nothing that's happening there is incremental and that without that campaign, that journey would have happened anyway. A classic example that happens within a company would be discussing whether to remove the branded PPC ads. Whether if that branded PPC ad wasn't there, people would click through the organic link. So we take that out and we can see that that now switches to organic. So in this case, my theory has been proved correct. And that person has made the same search for my brand name, but rather than clicking on the PPC ad, because it's no longer there, has gone through and clicked onto the organic instead. And that's resulted in the transaction. And that's great for me because that means in this one example, I've just saved myself that PPC cost and I've still got the same amount of revenue at the end. Now, that may happen to one person, but to somebody else, they might not click on that at all. And that might not mean that that person doesn't go on to transact, or it might mean, as in this example, that they still do. So they don't click on that visit, but they do come back later and they go through then to buy. So it might have been that they still have done that paid search or that search browsing activity, but clicked on the competitor site or not found us instead, and then come back later to complete the journey through that last click. So what we're looking at here is the incremental impact of each of these marketing activities. It's something that has been done within the CRM world using control groups for a very long time, but we don't tend to do very much in the digital marketing space. Because it's not that easy to be able to put in a control group when you don't have full access to the data. And many analytical tools that we work with don't give us that option. So the other option here is that because that activity wasn't there, that person didn't make that click and they didn't make that transaction. So in that case, you can see that for this one individual, having that campaign there was an incremental piece of marketing, and we should really add that back in. So knowing who is using your website and in what way is vital to making the right business decisions. And we can then apply that to maximize revenue and reduce the costs. The way we tend to see it then is that we break out the different customers into groups based on their engagement, looking at those who are highly engaged through to low engaged and occasional visitors to the website. And by looking at each of those groups, we'll see different patterns for different campaigns. So in this example here, we've got a piece of analysis that was done for one campaign, and we broke the different customer groups out based on how engaged they were. And then by using control groups that we've applied to our marketing, and you can use real control groups or you can use pseudo control groups by looking at people who have similar behaviors and similar backgrounds to how their activity is. We can see what would be a base contribution, which is the revenue that would have happened anyway, and whether there's positive or negative profit. And the positive or negative profit comes from the comparison of similar people from that similar group, and then the cost that we invested in them for the marketing activity compared to the extra revenue we got as off a result. So if we had a marketing campaign through PPC that cost us £10,000 worth of revenue, and generated 100,000 worth of incremental of sales, but only 8,000 that was incremental, then we'd see that be a loss-making campaign. What we get to see by looking at it by the different customer groups is that even though this campaign itself was a profit-making campaign, both from a amount of overall revenue, but also from the journeys that it was involved with compared to customers making similar journeys but not using that campaign. We can also see from each of those different groups that the highly engaged down to the low engaged made a profit, although with the low engaged it was very small. And the occasional group and the not engaged group were loss-making groups. So in this instance, we made the decision that for this campaign, we'll keep it running. So rather than using an on-off switch, we can dial it down or dial it up, and then look at saying that the customer groups occasionals and not engaged are not going to see this campaign anymore. And by doing that, you can save on average between 13 and 16% of marketing budgets. It means that we get the ability to not just turn off a campaign if it's not working, to not just look at all of the revenue, but look at what is incremental. And that's most commonly seen through paid search by the transfer of clicks from an organic ad through to a paid one, and then seeing what is making the business money and what is not. And more importantly, if you get down to the nuts and bolts, you'll be able to see that when you switch on a campaign, what we're then seeing is revenue coming through from the positive profit correlates to what the company sees on the bottom line. Additional things that we discover by looking at this model and looking at customers and their journeys. The first one is noise. So where we say noise, what we mean is we take the approach of looking at bounces, so those single page view visits, and applying that to people who all they've ever done is make a single page view visit. And we call those people bouncers in our terminology. And that makes up on average a third of all visits that come through to a website. They're people who make a single visit and a single page view. Those people, 90% of them will never return to that site. It's just noise. It's the equivalent of measuring people who trigger an automatic door as they walk past the high street shop. Including that within analysis is not going to help you see what's working and what's not. These are the accidental clicks, the people who didn't mean to come through to your website. We have the ability through our tools of being able to filter that out where we need to. So we can look at it for it when we're summing up total costs and total interactions. But we can filter those out to just let us see who really is looking at our website and what the actual size of a potential customer base that we have from the customer base that is making transactions with the site. The second option and opportunity that we have is now taking us from where we were looking at that first slide and measuring those visits compared to the transactions and getting conversion rates, which in the normal space will be between 2 and 5%. We're looking at it from a journey point of view. They're actually closer to 10 to 20%. Because customers on average are making between 3 or 4 visits, up to 6 visits is typical, especially within those in highly engaged groups. So looking at the attribution rates of those journeys gives a much healthier view of our website. It also means, as I mentioned earlier, because we're looking at the world from journeys, you can also start to see the lost opportunity. Now, measuring and trying to see what is successful and trying to replicate that is a hard thing to do. But by looking at those that weren't successful, identifying the areas where the journey was lost, is where we can hone in on what areas we need to improve to make something work better next time. Thank you very much. Like I say, my name is Nick Greatrex. You've got my contact details here. If you want to see a bigger and more expanded deck on our digital playback product, which powered the insights behind this webinar, please just follow that bit.ly that's on the screen. Or you can contact me and we can discuss things in further. So as a reminder, that was our New World Same Headache, solving the attribution challenge with the customer journey model.